Everybody, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Zactivist Speaks on right here for the Educators Incubator on LinkedIn. We can't wait to have some of our guests join us, where tonight we are talking to the host of one of America's most innovative educational podcasts, as well as an experienced educational leader, the one and the only Patrick Harris. Patrick, welcome to the Zactivist Speaks. How are you, my brother?
I'm great. I've never got an introduction like that, baby. Let's keep that rolling. I appreciate that.
You know what? We try to do a little bit better on LinkedIn. You know what I'm saying? So we try to keep it, and make it high class, high quality, and LinkedIn level professional. But those of you who are joining us, whether you are watching us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn, please feel free to comment and share with us, because your comments help keep the conversation going. Patrick, before we begin, I have a lot of questions. Tonight, we're talking about the crisis, or the looming crisis, as you called it, in American education. That tweet actually was talked about last week on this platform, and I was like, I've got to invite him on to talk about it as well. Tell me this. What do we need to know about this podcast? Because I hadn't had a new episode in about a month.
So check this out. The Common Sense podcast was started back in 2017, when me and a close friend of mine got the idea that there were not a lot of teacher voices out there talking about education. And so we went on a mission to really tell our story, right? So we covered our complete year of teaching week by week for an entire school year. And it was wildly successful and wildly popular. And so from there, I really learned that I think a lot of people think that they know what teachers do, or think they know what teachers go through, but I don't think that they actually know that teachers have stories and are human beings. And so now the Common Sense podcast has evolved into authentic storytelling for teachers, by teachers, that not only tell you, what we do in the classroom, but who we are outside of the classroom, that informs our instructional practices and how we show up. And so right now we're in the midst of getting ready to release, actually, in 2 weeks, but we're in the midst of telling the stories of queer educators and their coming of age stories, and then how that impacts how they show up in the classroom or in schools every single day.
So for those of you who are joining us, the very first thing that I want for our audience to engage in, let us know what are the topics that you want to see addressed on the Common Sense podcast, as well as right here on the Zactivist Speaks. I got 10 weeks of topics for you. But again, I also want to give voice to those of you out there in the fields who are with us. So Patrick, that's really exciting. And I know that episode, have you already recorded the episode?
Yes, they are ready, locked and loaded, ready to go. February 1st, we'll be back.
Give us a preview. Tell me, what is one revelation that came from your discussion with queer educators of color?
Oh my goodness, so many things. One, I think the biggest sort of revelation that sort of came about, right, is just like queer people, we kind of experience a second childhood once we become adults and we're out of the homes of our parents, or homes of people who kind of want to keep our queerness locked in a cage, right? And so while we're in the classroom coaching and mentoring and affirming queer youth, right, seeing them through their journey, we're also going through our own kind of second adolescence ourselves alongside them.
That's a pretty profound realization. I can't wait to hear this, your interview. What do you feel from that discussion and from the educators that you were able to engage with and work with, what was the biggest challenge they faced?
Well, there's two biggest challenges. One is just like the inner work that they have to do, the weight of that, right? Like having to unlearn, self-hate, right? And then having to navigate all of the different voices that are in your head about who teachers should and should not be, right? I don't think that people think that teachers are allowed to have sexualities, right? But especially not queer sexualities. So that's the first one. And then the second one is safety, right? So how can I remain safe as a openly queer educator, and be able to model safe practices, right, with my students, colleagues, and then in the communities in which they teach?
That sounds like a bold, courageous interview. Again, I cannot wait to hear
It's
it.
4 of them.
You say it's 4 parts?
It's 4 interviews, 4 teachers from around the country.
That's going to be amazing. You know what? I may have to replicate that and bring some of those educators right here and have a deeper dive into those topics, because I can't wait to hear this discussion. Pat, this is the tweet that set off the whole push to get you right here. And this is the tweet. Boom. You said and boldly proclaimed that our country is in crisis. This has been an ongoing thread in some of your posts and some of your thought leadership. What do you mean when you say our country is in crisis?
So this is layered, but our country does not value education. That's the crisis. That's the crisis. Our country does not value education. Thus, our country does not value schooling either, right? And this kind of unfolds in many ways, right? There is a decline and has been a decline for many, many, many years in teacher education programs, right? And so we've seen from a survey that there's been a 19% decrease in enrollment in teacher education programs, right? And so this crisis is showing us, what's so alarming about what's happening in Oklahoma is that we know that the decline has increased, but now we're seeing that colleges, right, are not even able to offer programs to pre-service or incoming teachers simply because the interest is not there. And that is a reflection of how our country views and values teachers currently in the classroom and then also schools, right? This crisis is also because of teacher pay, right? Teacher pay is notoriously has been low. There's a crisis of a lack of respect, right, of teachers in schools and the work that we do on the ground every single day. We are seeing right now that the pandemic continues to reveal the inequity that exists in schools every single day. And so at some point in time, while we're in the midst of a health pandemic currently, a global health pandemic, right, we have to also talk about the education crisis that our country has been in, right, and what continues to amplify.
I'm so glad that you shared this article, or this news story rather. You shared this news story, and I really hope that it gets more attention and more traction. Again, major colleges and universities in the state of Oklahoma are completely ending a whole entire slate of courses for pre-service teachers because they do not have candidates interested in those programs. We do not have teachers coming out of colleges, not only in Oklahoma, but all around the United States of America, they have no teachers coming into the field. And when you take that knowledge, that's right, Candy, it is crazy. When you take that knowledge, right, and then you couple it with this realization, here is a graphic that I thought was pretty telling, and I think it really reiterates this crisis that you speak of, Pat. And it's this right here. And this is as big as I can blow it up. But again, in 2010, we had 21,000 teachers in Pennsylvania getting certified. 21,000 teachers. But in 2019, we only had 6,000. So we have dropped by, 3 times fewer, 3 times the number less teachers coming out with certifications in the course of really in less than 10 years. That is scary. And I think that is extremely concerning. Pat, what I want to know from you is, you talked about teacher pay. Why do you think so few young people want to go into education?
Well, I think a lot of young folks, and I'll consider myself young folks, a lot of us are recovering from the trauma of school. Schools are traumatic places, right? Folks are, a lot of people didn't like school. It wasn't a place where they felt seen. They weren't learning material that they felt was useful at that particular time. They didn't feel prepared for college, right? They may have been involved in violence in schools and didn't feel safe or protected by their teachers. Maybe they didn't see themselves in the materials, right? Maybe their humanity was put on the back burner while standardized tests was given the spotlight, right? So I think that that's one thing, but then also the biggest benefit of schooling, right, is the relationship between teachers and students. Teachers see the stress that students see the stress that teachers experience every single day, right? They see us coming in early and staying late. They see us struggling, right? They see us tired. They see us managing very difficult student behaviors, right? They know that we don't get paid that much, right? And so they ask themselves, why would I want that for myself, right? I know and I see that there are other options for me to make a lot more money, to feel, to have a more fulfilling life, right? Why would I want this? And it's a hard argument to kind of compete with.
I think, you know what? I agree with you. I'm going to give a little bit of maybe a small caveat, right? But not really, Pat, a small one. But and I'm going to show a graphic because you're in Michigan, right?
I'm in Michigan.
Okay, you're in Michigan because I went and found some Michigander data.
Uh-oh.
Are you a native of Michigan?
Yes, I am. Detroit, born and raised.
Detroit, born and raised, right? Okay, good. I have some friends who live in Detroit. They work for Delta, and they're based out of Detroit. So, yes. This is what I do believe, that the pay in education is a concern, and it is unfortunate, right? All of my life and all of my career in education, I was under the assumption that there's no way to pay a rate that is fair to the workload because there's so many teachers and it's publicly funded and taxpayer dollars, blah, blah, blah. But then when you learn about the amount of money being spent on the military to end lives or protect freedom, however you want to see it, as opposed to the amount of money that is going to go into helping prepare our future, is concerning. But then when you think about the people who, who pay for school at the primary and secondary level, maybe getting a totally different experience than those who go for free, it makes you think there may be bigger issues at play as to why teachers are so underpaid. But with all of that being said, I will say that the level of reward that I received as a high school teacher was the most reward I've ever received in my entire life from a job. Like I taught high school English for 9 years and then transitioned into administration. And it was wonderful to work in administration. And I was able to impact the lives of some educators, but it was impacting that whole group of students, all 260 to 280 kids in a given year, for that 1 hour a day over the course of those, 36 weeks. That was the most rewarding time of my life. And even though it was some hard times.
Oh, okay.
There was no, back in my day, there was no talk of self-care. There was no vacations to be had. There were no days off, but the reward of serving those kids. And then now seeing where they are and hearing the response, it truly, it was, if nothing else, that right there may be why, if I had to do it over again, I certainly would. Yeah.
I agree with you, right? Like, I feel the same way. This is my 7th year of teaching. I have worked in 6 different schools. I have seen education from every possible corner you could think of. And that feeling is still the same, right? To be able to nurture children and watch them grow and bump their heads is unlike any sort of feeling. It is a reward. but unfortunately, rewards don't pay the bills, right? And groceries are going up, gas is going up, and we still are required to work outside of hours to make school run efficiently. I don't think that people understand that the work hours that teachers work every single day are contact hours. Those are hours that we are in contact with children. That does not include planning, grading, calling parents. That does not include research. That does not include professional development or any of those things. I would also just add that as we continue to like move forward, we have to think about also that these districts have money, right? You're not paying us a lot, but you just pay a consultant, right, to come in and make $10,000 to speak to us about nothing for an hour, right? You got to make it make sense. You got to make it make sense that you just paid tens of millions of dollars to a curriculum company to force us to teach for curriculum that does not serve our students. You're paying tens of millions of dollars to a standardized testing company to make our students, right, or to make them to make them take a test, right, that has content on it that does not reflect our students' backgrounds, right? We got to talk about the fact that it's not that these schools don't have money. They just don't have the right priorities. And so we have to ask ourselves, at what point in time are schools going to put their money where the people are and not where the systems and the politicians and the things that don't matter are?
I think that's a profound statement. I love that, right? Like here's a quotable moment. Let me write it down at minute 17. Here's a quotable moment. When are we going to put our money in the people and not the programs? When are we going to put our priorities in the people and not put our priorities in the politics and the policies that undergird what we do? I think that is, a key statement of fact, and what you're saying. When you look at your home state of Michigan, this is what we were able to get, right? So I saw your document on Oklahoma. I wanted to see, well, to what level is this something happening nationwide? And that's when I found this, that enrollment in teacher preparation programs in 2010 to 2019 has dropped by like 8,000 people on average. So you have 8,000 fewer educators coming out of schools in Michigan ready to serve. In addition to that, the number of actually certified teachers in that state went from 4,400 down to 2,400. So you've lost 2,000 teachers who are newly certified in that time frame. This is the absolute, not the coming teacher crisis or shortage, but this is the shortage that is right here, right now, and the data clearly reflects that.
Yeah, Michigan and folks should know that Michigan is home to some of the best education schools in the country, including, of course, Michigan State, which has been the number one college of education.
University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we don't talk about that school over there. That's they down the street, but
it's highly rated. It's one of the best, right? It's highly rated.
Yeah, absolutely. Michigan State still ranks number one in elementary and secondary education, right? And turning out for that program. So absolutely, it's alarming, especially seeing recently Michigan took a mail approach to ask retired teachers or teachers who still hold a certification who are not in the classroom to come back, please, right? Because we absolutely need them. And so it absolutely is alarming. And it just shows that, right? Like, it's not just schools in the South. It's not just schools on the East, the West, or the North,
it's not
right?
Just like school systems in red states or blue states. It's a nationwide issue that needs to be addressed in a time when more and more major issues are bubbling up to the forefront that need to also, be addressed. I cited last week this article, and I was able to find the data here. And this is a retweeted quote from Forbes magazine from Sarah Mullen Gross. The reading zone, which said we're at a major tipping point in education. And this comes directly from the article that was in Forbes. according to a recent survey, 48% of teachers admitted that they had considered quitting within the last 30 days. Of that number, 34% said that they were going to leave the profession entirely. This again speaks to the fact that the crisis in education is not looming, that it really is here. Pat, when you look at your experience and you looked at the things that you've experienced in your career, what do you want to see education do differently throughout the next 10 years? So you're a young educator in the first 7 years. So let's say, and when you have reached let's say when you reach year 20, what do you want to see?
I want us to have a thriving Department of Education, a thriving federal Department of Education. So much of what is wrong in education is due to the fact that there is no national leadership, right? And so when folks say, oh, yeah, we have to reimagine education, right? We can't just reimagine education in Massachusetts, right? We can't just reimagine it in California or New York. We have to reimagine it everywhere, nationwide. And so that means that we're going to really need the Department of Education to really rebrand itself, to let folks know what it is that they actually do, right? And then two, they're going to have to begin to lead the effort of creating a vision for what the American education system should look like, right? There should not be 50 different types of education or quality of education in this country, right? The federal Department of Education, even though they're young, right, they're going to have to step up. And so within that, we're going to need to see the complete eradication of standardized testing as we know it. It has to go, right? It absolutely has to go.
Now you brought up two great points. Now I have your tweets that slam Miguel Cardona. We're going to talk about this tweet. We're going to talk about Secretary of Education Cardona. And we're also going to, we'll talk about why. This is going to be a question I'm going to ask you is this. Why should we get rid of standardized tests? I firmly agree, but I want to push back because I know that's going to be a major, that's something that has to be probed. But before I probe that, I want to give and always give like the devil's advocate. I don't think that's the wrong word for it. I'm going to give the Zactivist angle, which is, again, looking at it from all sides. When you say we want to do more standardization around educational policies, innovation, and push from the Department of Education, how would that sit when you have 50 different states and 50 different state departments of education making localized decisions based upon the local decision of school boards, who are also elected officials? Like, what would give the United States Department of Ed, which many Republicans feel shouldn't even exist, the authority to set the tone for the entire country?
That's a hard question, right? And I think that just like speaks to the values of our country, right? Like, there is a back and forth right now about how much should the government be able to control local decisions. I think when it comes to the Republicans, I try not to really. It's hard to argue with them because so much of their thought process is contradictory, right? You don't want there to be a national legislation for education in this country, but you want national legislation to limit the rights of women in their bodies, right? You don't want there to be a national approach to education, but you want there to be an overturning of the election, right? Like, so it's hard for me to argue with extremists. But when you look at other major countries in the world, right? Like, and when you think about what we're trying to achieve here, right? A thriving multicultural democracy, we're going to need to come together probably, right? To be able to talk and to be able to be on one accord. It's not really about what you should and should not do. It's not about what specifics. It really is about a common core. I didn't even think about that. A common core set of values, right? That we kind of align ourselves to. Schools, individual school districts absolutely should be able to make decisions for kids who are in front of them. We cannot standardize everything. But what I'm talking about is a vision, right, and values, and then the Department of Education being intentional about bridging the gaps. If we know that students in Detroit, right, get a certain level of funding, right, than students in Birmingham, Michigan, which is 10 miles away, right, and Birmingham is one of the richest counties or cities in the state of Michigan, then the federal government should be able to pop in and say, hey, we're going to level the playing field here, right? And then when it comes to standardized testing, just to go back, right, we cannot use that as a means to create equity in our country's education system, right? That's why I was so angry with Bush, and I was angry with Obama as well, who said, hey, we got money for schools, but you got to be able to pass this test, right? And we know that these tests are not made with our kids in mind. And why is that important, right? Because we know that the best educational practices are culturally responsive, right? And so you want us to be culturally responsive every single day, but when we take the test, it has absolutely nothing to do with our students, right? For example, I just want to give this quick example because it just means so much.
Oh, yeah, take your time. There's no rush. There's no rush. Now, I got a lot to say, but take your time.
I was proctoring a standardized test in Michigan 3 years ago, and it was a second grade test. It was computerized, and a student was reading a passage, and you're not supposed to answer questions for students, right? And a student, he's like, Mr. Harris, can you, like, I don't get this. And he's like mad about it. He's like, I don't understand this. This don't make no sense. And I was like, well, read the passage, like, what are you referring to? And he kind of points to this section of the article or the story that talks about a young man and he's eating baked beans for breakfast. And he's so stuck on this one sort of detail that he can't kind of move past it. And he's like, who would eat baked beans for breakfast? That don't make no sense, right? And I just couldn't do anything but laugh in my head, but also just like shake my head in just like anger and frustration because I understood. The only reason why that made sense to me is because I lived in Qatar and I had friends who were from the UK in which baked beans are a part of a traditional English breakfast. In Detroit, we eat baked beans at the barbecue, right? We eat baked beans in July, right? And so it's those small details that trip up our students and don't give them a fair chance. We know that background knowledge is one of the most key components of reading comprehension, right? If students don't have background knowledge on a subject,
and they don't have the schema to access the information they're reading, it doesn't mean they can't comprehend. It means they're lacking, they have gaps in the schema, therefore they're not able to perform well. Absolutely.
Right. So we have to ask ourselves, who are creating these exams? For whom are they creating them for? And why is a school's funding on the line?
Now, Pat,
test scores.
Now, I agree 120%. And in Mississippi, we ate baked beans with hot dogs, right? Or like just the
okay.
beans. So, we ate baked beans in my household, every couple of weeks. Like baked beans was a staple. Now, I'm going to say this because, you know how I feel about President Obama, as an old school, old time liberal. This is why. Now, let me say this. President Obama was giving American school systems a massive amount of money from the Race to the Top with Race to the Top funding. The reason why he had to tie in the accountability standards is that there was no way that the Republican-controlled Congress was going to approve the spending bill and the spending measures. There was no way. So school systems were looking at either getting this money with strings attached or getting nothing at all. And the need was desperate because American education was on a continuous and consistent decline from the
Right.
continuous attempts to dismantle the work. So,
Right.
so much work had gone into the Common Core effort and Common Core push that was led by governors like the Republican governor of Georgia at the time, Sonny Perdue, that then started to get dismantled, and then education was on the verge of splintering off and breaking totally different pieces. So I don't think see, what we do, Pat, is we want to blame the president, right?
You're right.
The context of why he had to make those decisions. Like
Sure.
right now, I am being inundated on social media with people attacking President Biden, President Biden, President Biden, President Biden, President Biden, President Biden, when the failure to pass voting rights legislation, which is going to come, is absolutely not indicative of Biden. Biden has nothing to do with passing any laws. He has the bully pulpit, he has a soapbox, he has the ability to set the agenda, but he doesn't have the ability to pass any laws. And people are also Manchin Cinema, and Manchin and Cinema are pretty horrible people. Don't think that they're not. But we should never be in a society or in a government or in a place where two people are the only ways to pass bills and laws. There should be at least 6 Republican leaders elected by the people who have the wherewithal to say, I want every American citizen to vote and have a right to be represented. That is so simple. This is not a moral issue. This is not a social issue. This is 100% the rights of the people as guaranteed by the United States Constitution. And we can't get there. So, and again, how voting, please explain how voter, but it won't get passed. It's not going to get passed.
Right.
The argument is the fact that it won't get passed and we're putting all the blame on Christian Cinema and Joe Manchin is not fair. They don't have to vote the way we want them to vote. They're individual people. We can't make them do anything. But if we're gonna criticize them, why are we letting the 50 Republicans and 50 other senators who are gonna vote no go unharmed or go untalked about or not be blasted on social media and the media in the same way that Manchin and Cinema are being blasted? That I don't understand, right? And so, but all that to say, Biden is not the one to do it. Now he could give me my $50,000 in loan forgiveness, so I'm gonna need him to clean them ears out and brush them and fix and denture. What's that? Polydent them dentures and give me my money. I am waiting. I am waiting for that. Now, when you talk about ending standardized testing, if we end standardized testing, right? What would be the measurement that we would use to identify whether or not schooling is effective for all students?
So I think I want to be clear that I'm not anti-assessment. I'm anti-standardized testing, right? And so all teachers believe that students should be assessed. Do they have to sit down and bubble in letters to show that they can read, right? Is there a more innovative approach to assessing students' needs that are more 21st century than the ways in which we are testing students right now, right? I think if we can reform the ways in which we assess, thus, if you know anything about backwards planning, then thus we can reform the instructional practices that we use every single day. I would love to see, and there are grassroots movements of this happening right now, more innovative performance exams that can be used to measure students' ability to read, write, do math, science, etc., right? I think that these tests should be made from all stakeholders, right? Like, I think that we have to sort of get teachers, students, parents, etc. on board to kind of designing what this assessment could possibly look like, right? That could possibly mean, hey, like, it's the end of the year. These are the things that we've covered. These are the standards, right? You have 1 to 3 days to create a solution to a community need, right, that showcases this, right? And so we see this often, right? We know the power of project-based learning. We know the power of performance exams, of, whether it's long-term or project. But for some reason, we put all of our effort and all of our money behind the simplest, most cost-effective, or cheapest approach, right? Which is to sit down, read a passage, bubble in letters, and then how perform on that particular day is how much money your school gets, which thus it informs how much money your community gets and how folks are impacted.
Well, and continues to exacerbate the opportunity gaps that exist within our school system. So I agree with you. We are in complete alignment about what needs to happen around standardized testing. I fully agree that the way that we assess learning and growth in our schools is flawed. And having again, stakeholders be a part of the process, but having a variety of multiple measures to really assess what our students know and how they can use that knowledge is where we need to go in the next 10 years, right? That is my dream when I think about where I want education to be in 10 years. It is at the place where like learning assessments are authentic to students, and it is something that would actually be valuable for the journey those kids will take once they leave public education, right? Once they matriculate out. It needs to be relevant. We are measuring things and we're measuring like learning standards that may not in any way translate over into what a child will truly need in the next 10 years. So while we're sitting here measuring at the secondary level specifically, gerunds and participles in the ELA space and polynomials and whatever you do with tan and cosine in the mathematics space, we're not looking at critical thinking and how you apply critical thinking and how you apply the ability to communicate and work collectively as a group to solve problems. Those are the things that everyone will do every single day in the world of work, no matter your field. And those are some things that I think we can do better with assessments to get our kids the skills they need. Now, project-based learning, I love if it is authentic project-based learning. What I do not love are all of the industries out here making money off of pre-made projects that don't do anything for any children, right? Because so many people are wrong. Now, Facebook users said that is because Democrats hold their party accountable. I agree with that. But at the same time, Democrats are citizens, and we need to hold everybody accountable and just tell the whole story. Facebook user also said, just tell the parents that critical race theory is a part of the assessments, and then that will be the end of standardized testing. That may be the case. So you may have given us the golden ticket.
That's the golden ticket right there, CRT.
That may be the answer. Now, Pat, you said this on Twitter. You said,
"Oh my Lord."
You said, "What? Read it for us. You read it for us." What you say?
I said, "What are you doing, Secretary Cardona? Schools are in disarray, shutting down everywhere because of Omicron, and you're at an in-person conference with two of the most infamous education grifters in the game right now. You can't make this up. Cardona is certainly a wild card."
Tell me what you meant by that. First off, I didn't, who are the grifters and what should he have been doing?
So here's what I know what's happening with our secretary right now. He's currently on a listening tour, right? He is going around the country right now listening and talking to teachers and teacher influencers, right? In hopes to show the country that he cares and that he cares about teachers, right? And so I'll speak generally, but there are a sector of people or educators out there, former teachers, who were able to create a following on social media. They were able to steal practices or adapt practices that have already been published and seen, right? Throw, really effective branding behind them, right? And they were able to create conferences or experiences that excited teachers. Doesn't necessarily mean that it was research-based, doesn't necessarily mean that it actually worked. However, we know that there have been a lot of controversy behind teacher Instagram, teacher Twitter, or folks that are kind of just like in it for the cuteness, right? The cute fonts, the cute experiences, right? And and the issue, right, is that these teachers or educators or influencers, what they do is they use their sort of experience as a teacher or an educator to build this following, and then they leave the classroom, so they leave the work, and then they sort of market 100% full-time to these teachers, profiting off of our daily pain, profiting off of systems that constantly belittle our profession, right? And so when I say grifters, I'm talking about people who aren't really, they're not really solving problems, right?
Yeah, a grifter is a thief. Like, someone who grifts, they steal, small scale stealing, and they take what they take at a small level is then expanded on a large level for their own profit. So, Candy, you and I talked about, don't put it in the chat. Do not put the name in the chat. But the person that you and I spoke on the phone about last night, that content creator, could be considered a grifter. And that he is taking the research of other people, or even taking the content of other people, repurposing that content and making way more money off of that content.
Yes,
absolutely. And selling himself as though he's an expert. That's a grifter.
And that's the key thing, right? And so really, we know that a cute conference with glitter and confetti bombs are not going to solve the education crisis that we're actually in, right? But instead,
but Pat, you love it. Now, come on, because you're at what? You teach at the elementary level?
I teach middle school.
Middle school. Now, look, those elementary and middle school teachers and half the secondary high school teachers, they love the glitter. They love those cute little big head kids with some sticks being drawn, and they shop it up on teacher pay teachers, and then they love that. So
but the only reason why they do it is because the system is flawed, right? And so the reason why I'm holding the secretary accountable is because I'm saying, yes, go on the listening tour, listen to teachers, right? But talk to teachers who are actually in the classroom, right? Talk to teachers who are actually on doing the work, right? And then we need you to develop, or to begin to develop some systems that are going to make long-term change. I don't think that talking to teachers, particularly in person, right? Like at a conference without a mask on in the midst of Omicron, when entire school districts are shutting down, there's a teacher shortage. Like, I know the secretary means well, but his communication is kind of tone deaf, right? And I need him to really sort of like get a communication and branding strategy, right? So that he is communicated in a way that does not belittle the work that actual classroom teachers are on the ground doing right now.
That's right. I'm going to research and find out who his communications person is, right? Like, he needs a Simone Sanders. He needs someone who is going to move. He needs a Jen Psaki, right? Even though she's rare and hard to find. But he needs that. I agree 100%. I'm going to be honest with you. Cardona didn't know who them women were. He didn't know them women. He did not know who they were, right? He had it organized by the extra yard people. He sat down, he did his interview thinking all will be well. And then out of nowhere comes this maverick, innovative educator from Michigan and put his butt on blast. He didn't expect that, and he was probably hoping. He and his people probably hoping, let's hope this gets buried and nobody will be none the wiser. But the thing is, you have people out there who will stay on that neck and they'll keep it going, and he can't afford to have those. He can't afford to have that out there, and to do that.
I don't think that we're asking him to do the impossible, right? We're not asking him to do a lot, actually, right?
Okay, what are you asking him to do? Like, if you could sit down with Miguel Cardona right now, what would it be that you would say, this is what I want from you?
I think, considering the circumstances, right, seeing that there's Republican opposition, the least that you can do is affirm teachers right now, to back teachers unions right now, right? Like, in the midst of a crisis and teaching shortage, right? We are witnessing, I'm not even gonna say we're on the brink of, but we're witnessing the collapse of our complete educational system, because the only people that were holding up the system in the first place were actual teachers. Your number one job right now is to save those teachers, to keep them in the classroom, right? And so what I need you to do right now, Secretary Cardona, right, is not just talk to the teachers who have influence, right, or talk to teachers of the year, right, but to talk to folks who are actually in the classroom, to do more organizing, to figure out, like, how can we save teachers and keep them in the classroom, to address the teaching teaching shortage as the Secretary of Education, right? I'm not asking for a lot. I'm not going to put too much on his plate. I'm going to say affirm teachers, right? Actual classroom teachers who are in the classroom right now, figuring out, am I going to get COVID today or tomorrow or Wednesday? Which one is it going to be, right? Those who are afraid to go to work, those who don't have a choice to go to work. How are we going to put teachers first? Nobody in the country is putting teachers first. We need the Secretary of Education to put teachers first. He has to support a remote option for education at this point in time. He has to the majority of teachers in the country support a remote option. He has to back teachers on that.
I agree. I think you said some phenomenal things. Now, I will say this, right? If that question was posed to me, presented to me, it would probably be a little bit different in the fact that, number one, I do think that a lot of what we want to see at the federal level isn't probably gonna, it wouldn't happen, right? It wouldn't hold up. Think about it. Just today, we saw that the Supreme Court did not uphold the vaccination requirement of businesses getting federal contracts. Like, you literally are getting federal dollars. You're literally getting federal contracts that are large amounts of money, but you refuse to enforce a vaccine mandate for your employers to stop the spread of COVID-19, or at least mitigate the spread of COVID-19, so that our schools can safely reopen and safely be staffed and safely educate our children. So with that in mind, knowing that the Supreme Court isn't going to support you on that, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, a number of things that we want to see happen at the federal level with education would never stand the bar of the Supreme Court, because of the justices that we have. And when we hear people say, I'm mad at Joe Biden because he's going to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to withhold my vote, what you will get when you withhold your vote will be a 100% all 9 justices of the Supreme Court being conservative, because you'll have another conservative president sit in the office, Trump or someone like Trump, and put their people in place. That is the bigger danger at play. That is something I was saying when we didn't come out and vote for Hillary, because we didn't like we didn't like the image of Hillary Clinton that the media sold us. Not the reality of Hillary, but the lies and the image. What I want to see from Cardona, and I believe, Pat, my expectations may be just a little bit more realistic, is this. Okay, is this. One, forget them $50,000 in student loans. If you have to sit down with Joe Biden every single day to get it done, forgive that debt. Forgive that $50,000 right off the bat. That's one thing that you can do that's quick and easy. Additionally, I do agree to affirm what's happening in education with way more communication directly to the frontline workers in the field. That's not hard to do. That's just a better communication game from the Secretary of Education. In addition to that, what I also want to see is federally funded efforts to create a better pipeline of educators in all 50 states. They can't incentivize teachers to stay in the field, as well as financially incentivize teachers to join the field through non-traditional pathway routes that will result in effective certification with effective teachers, right? I'm not a huge fan of lots of alternative route plans, but I realize that if the federal government took a greater role in this, we can ensure quality in the preparation that we have, and we can also ensure that we have a workforce in our classrooms that's robust and well qualified. And you're not having, and this is not to knock our bus drivers and our subs, but here's the thing: if I chose to be a bus driver, I did not choose to be a teacher. So to make
Yes.
me come out of being a bus driver and then teach in a classroom as a sub and go back to driving the bus, I may make a little bit more money, but that is not the choice that I've made over my life. And it's a disservice to me and it's a disservice to the kids. And that needs to stop. And this could help avoid that in the future.
But I would also just add, right? We need to see just a vision, right? I don't think that I can sit here and say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I could not tell you what the secretary's vision is for American education. What does he believe to be true about how, when a student goes from pre-K through 12th grade and they graduate, what is the portrait of that graduate? What should they be able to do? Who should they be? What should they believe in and stand for, right? And so I also think, in addition to those practical items, I think I'm just a big thinker overall. We got to see a vision, right? We got to see a vision from the secretary that says, even though states have most control over education, here's what the department believes about education, right? Here are our core values. Here is what we think, blah, 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 right? Like, and to really roll that out. Because again, I don't think that people know what the Department of Education does. I don't think that they know what the secretary does. And I think that this is a great opportunity as teachers continue to get more national press, right? Which was not something that was happening prior to COVID, right? Folks did not give a damn about education and teaching. We never made the news ever, right? And so while teachers are sort of getting this press right now, it really is possible for him to say, here is our vision to reimagine education. Teachers are upset because we are still doing the same thing in 2022 that we were in
2012, in 2002, and 1992.
Look, education, I often say education is like that, it's like that computer update that comes, right? And we keep saying, not now, maybe later. Try me in an hour. Try me tomorrow, right? And I think that what classrooms and education looks like in 2022 is very similar to how it looked in the very early 1900s, right?
That's another quotable moment, Pat. You've given us once again another quotable moment, right? That we can use. And so you got to invite me onto the Common Sense podcast so I can pull some quotables of my darn own, right? So, Tony, you bring up a lot of really good points as you really hit in about the lack of true vision education. Pat, I agree. We need a vision cast from Miguel Cardona, if nothing else. I am going to commit myself during the Atlanta snow day that is coming to research and listen to this man's speeches. So we have a snow day coming. When snow hits Atlanta, it shuts down the city. We're gonna shut it down. I am going to stock up my refrigerator, and I'm still probably gonna get a hotel because as soon as the wind blows, my lights go out where I live. So I'm probably gonna just get a hotel, have a staycation in the city where where it won't shut down, and I can just enjoy the snow, walk around, and not be freezing cold in my house. Now we are approaching the conclusion, right? And I have some questions for you as well as for our viewers. But before I go into our question portion, do you have any question for me?
I guess I'm wondering, I would kind of just throw the question back on you. What is your vision for education, right? Because I think these big questions is something that we should argue with as practitioners, as speakers, as influencers, as educators, right? What is your vision for American education?
And we hit on some of that, right? Number one, I want to see a complete overhaul of what it means to be accountable in education. I want to see multiple measures of how we evaluate student learning, and I want that to be safe and academically risk-free for the student as well as the teacher. I want to see lots of support in our schools for our educators that feels like support. I want to see the profession advance in the same way that other professions have advanced, and I want to see educators be treated like the professionals and degree leaders they are. Many times our educators have more education and more knowledge and skills than anybody else in any other field, but they're so undervalued and underpaid. And I want to see that change. I also want to see the level of respect garnered for the educators in this country to go up because it is known what they do in ways that it is not known now or respected now. So those are some of the things that I want to see happen in our field, and these are not hard things to do. I'm a firm believer, Pat, in what I call micro influence. Like I'm a huge believer in that, right? Like I have a whole free summit coming up on February the 9th. It's on a Sunday. Please, join in. It'll be in the same platform. You can just log in and watch and contribute. I'm lining up different people who have done this, right? So some people in this world are meant to have macro influence. President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, the calling over their life is macro influence. They are right now able to influence on a large scale what happens in this world, in this country.
Amen.
But every single one of us has the ability to have a micro influence on our daily lives and those around us. And there are ways to do that. And we need to embrace that so that we can do it. I think educational change, although we have talked a lot today about what we want to see at the macro level, it is, in my opinion, in my lifetime, I feel it will be an unreality. It's not going to happen. But what I can do is impact at a micro level every single educator that I touch, every single educational leader that I touch, and every pre-service leader and teacher that I touch. And that is the work that I believe in, that I'm called to do, and what I want to see happen. And so we can do that by having these critical conversations with people, that we push back on things like the assessments, and that we really help leaders realize where they flaw. Here's an example. I saw this tweet also when I was looking for tweets of a teacher named Boida. Boida said, our staff refused to teach in the building today due to the rising number of cases. We were committed to teaching remotely in a manner that was safe. What does that principal do? She locked us out of our Google Drive and our Zoom accounts and blocked us from teaching today. This is not, in my opinion, a principal who says, I exist to make teachers miserable, and I am in the profession to damage children. No one wants to do that. Right. Nobody lives their life in education to hurt people. She is misguided. She is she's just wrong, as wrong can be. But this is where a good, strong discussion and reasoning can help and make a difference. Something somewhere went wrong with this principle, and we can make it right. And that is what I want to see more of in education. Less pointless professional development, more meaningful learning and growth. And again, all of these things that have damaged our profession stem from a flawed accountability system. Do we need accountability? Every profession does. But what it looks like in education can't be how it looks in the business world. It can't be how it looks in the science, in a medical field, because that's not our field. We have our own profession. We have our own social science, and we need to rely on those elements to guide our profession and stop trying to make education something it was never meant to be.
Absolutely. And until we begin to see education and teaching as human work, we will always be misguided, right?
Always misguided. I agree. So here are the questions, and I'm going to ask these questions of Pat, but I'm also asking these questions of those of you out there. I want you to type the responses in. Question number one, what is the most defining characteristic of a great teacher? Question number one, what is the most defining characteristic of a great teacher?
The most defining characteristic of a great teacher is someone who has a great sense of self. Someone who really understands who they are and is involved in or doing their own self-work, right? As I said, so much of teaching is human work and how we show up every single day, right? What happens in your life, right, directly impacts the lives that are in front of you, right? That divorce you're going through, that avoiding therapy, right? Your own trauma that happened in school, right? All of that plays a part in the human work that we do with students every single day. And so teachers who are effective are strong people, right? And kind of understand the work that they have to do. They have a strong sense of self-awareness.
I love it. I agree 110% with that. I love that. And Tanya says that it's relationships first. Is that a defining characteristic of a great teacher is one who puts the relationship with that child above all else, and it's probably relationships in general to really make it. Candy says that it's empathy and the ability to determine if students have troubled home lives. That is also, I think, very key. You know what? For me, it would have to be the demonstrated ability to remain resolute in the face of adversity. That to
Yeah,
me is the number, because as a teacher, unfortunately, right now, you're going to face challenges
right.
that are unforeseen, some seen, but many unforeseen. And I feel as though a track record of being able to deal with adversity well makes you well qualified to be a great teacher. What is a great care? Is there a different characteristic of what makes a great leader, Pat, for you? And that's the question for my audience next. What is the one defining characteristic of a great leader? If it's different, if not, you can say it's the same.
A great, I would say someone who knows how to, I don't know the word for this, but kind of destroy the barrier, right, between the leader, right, and everyone else, right? Someone who knows how to kind of decentralize um, that position or that title, but someone who is people focused, right? Someone who is communal.
The technical educational term for that is distributive leadership, right? Like that's what the jargon would say. But the reality is this right here, what Candy said is that it is servant leadership. And I agree, right? And Tanya says leadership, and I think all of us agree on the same thing. To me,
Right.
the one defining characteristic of a great leader is that they're not a leader and they don't see themselves as a leader.
That's
And to
it.
me, many great leaders actually don't want to be the leader. They don't want to hold on to that position because they realize it is not something I want to do for my own personal income boost. It's not
Sure.
something I want to do for cloud or to be the principal or the superintendent. They
Right.
do it because they're called to do it, and it's a burden. It's the burden of leadership that comes with a responsibility that oftentimes means that you are working more and you're certainly serving more than everybody else. And Pat, that is one of the things that really made me excited about a Biden presidency, and the fact that at this point, at the end of his life, because he is at the end of his life, ain't nobody gonna live forever, right? He may have all the years on this earth that Jimmy Carter got plus a few more, but ultimately he is mortal and he will die, and he is in the final stages of life. At the end of his life, this man did not want to still be president of the United States of America, but
Right.
he did it because he felt as though he was the only person who could win, and polls indicated that he was. That made me, because to me, that is a hallmark of a real leader. You're not
Sure.
doing it for your career, you're not
Right.
doing it for your ego, you're doing it because you know the burden that comes with what you have to do. You're the only
Right.
one who can do it. And that's what I want to see more people in leadership do. Tanya also said is that they walk alongside the faculty and they want to nurture leadership in all staff. And
Absolutely.
again, that's what it means when you're not the leader, but you're actually the servant, because you're constantly serving your people. And it's hard work, and it's never, ever, ever easy to do, but it's rewarding in the end. And here's another, this is my next question for everybody. What is that one great characteristic of a great school or school system? Just
Mm,
that one.
I mean, the first word that comes to mind is just like love, right? Like that's the best part about being in person, right? And being
That's right.
alongside. Yes, you can learn at home. We know that there are kids who were successful academically in the pandemic, right? But the real ultimate vision and goal and purpose of school is like the coming together of a community of people, right, for the betterment of society, for the betterment of our hood, right, our community. And so whenever you can walk in a building and be able to see and hear and feel that love, that's what makes a dynamic school.
That is what makes it. I agree. That's what makes a dynamic school. From and Tanya says it's open and honest communication. I agree with that. You know what, Tanya? I think this is what makes the characteristics of a great school system is that it feels like yours. That's when
Mm-hmm.
you know you're in a good school. When that school feels, this is my school. Like this is
Period.
my classroom. This is my school.
My
You
teacher.
have a sense of ownership that is just automatic. Well,
Yeah.
Tanya and I used to work together at a school, and we felt that was our school. Like that was our school. Like we took ownership of that school. And when new leadership came, we were not happy because it's not your school, it's our school. That's how I know that was a good school. And you're right, it feels like home. Because it feels like home, you think you own it, but you also take care of it because it is home.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
to me what it feels like. That is the way that that it should be.
Right.
And that lets me know that it is. The last question I have for you, Pat, is this: what is in your you have had 7 years in the field? What has been the best trend in education that you've seen, and the worst trend in education that you've seen?
The best trend and the
Right, because
worst.
the trends come every year. We go back and forth. They come and go.
Um, I'm gonna say this. I'm not quite sure if I would call it a trend, but I'm a huge believer in Common Core standards. I would say that I don't know if I would call it a trend though,
Well,
but
you can definitely call it a moment in education.
it was certainly a huge moment, and I was in undergrad when they first started to roll it out, and so I kind of know nothing else but Common Core. But I was really excited about it because I was like, wow, like we got national standards, right? Like that's a big that's a big deal. And so I was kind of excited about that. Um, the worst trend, oh my goodness, I would probably say anything that has to do with slant, right? Or anything that has to do with teaching like a champion, right? Like that probably was the worst trend that still has a chokehold on our education system today.
Yeah, is
Oh,
that
but
Doug? Doug wrote. Isn't his name Doug? Was that
Doug,
Doug Lamar?
yes, I would just add though, I think that we're in a really good trend right now.
Yes.
That there is a bigger emphasis on social and emotional learning right now, and the
Well,
mental
there
well.
was Pat. There was. You know what? And I'm gonna come back to you, Tanya. I actually spoke to a good friend of mine who is going to
Yeah,
be a guest on this platform in 2 weeks, and we're going to talk about the future of social emotional learning. But what I didn't know, and her name is Corey Sanchez Smith, and she is one of the nation's leading experts in SEL. Former, done lots of work with Castle, lots of work with like major organizations and school systems, helping them set up their plans. Is that the whole entire anti-CRT movement has now started to attack SEL, and they're
right,
saying that SEL is one and the same with CRT, so they can attack it and
right,
take it out of schools as well. At a
right.
time when our students need that type of learning and the coping mechanisms and the restorative justice more than any other time I feel in our lives with
And
education.
SEL hasn't really gotten its fair like chance to really kind of step foot in schools, period, right? Because
Correct.
prior to COVID, there was character education, right? But it wasn't true social and emotional learning. And so when the statistics came out of how students were impacted, their mental health was impacted by COVID, right? There was kind of this push of like, okay, well, what are we going to do about student health, right? But we're also seeing that the response to that is put them back in school, right? Students are better when they're back in school, right? But nothing really has been changed to truly solve that effort.
Or to address the trauma they've experienced, to really
Yes.
look at what the whole process is. A lot of work that has to be done that wasn't done. You're absolutely right. Tanya says the worst has been the loss of autonomy and the increase in biased standards-based tests. That's been the worst. And the best for Tanya is integrating technology more organically with students. I agree that as technology improves and enhances, so too should be how we use it. Tanya says that SEL done correctly and with fidelity is very beneficial. So the practices are skills we can all benefit from learning. And I agree. You know what? For me, when I think about the trends in education, I would have to say that the best trend in education is in personalized learning, although it's been poorly done across the world. And I hope that someday someone can reclaim this buzzword concept they have now convoluted and bring it back to its original origins of just giving every single child an individualized learning plan and path based upon their interests and needs that will allow them to be their best authentic selves. The worst trend in education has been, in my opinion, all of the big money grubbing hands in the pie. There are too many capitalist goals and pursuits impacting what we do every single day. From
Yes.
things like reading and writing workshops being heavily funded and bringing in huge money, Lucy Calkins, all the way
And
over to, now a whole other movement.
Silicon Valley.
Right, all this stuff coming out of Silicon Valley, that needs to stop. There's money in education. We don't need that funny money. We need to have the money come in from the taxes that we pay to move our work forward. And so, with that being said, Pat, I appreciate you, my friend. If you ever need me, I am here. I will take this amazing interview. I'll be splicing it up, and we'll see posts throughout the course of next week. Thank you so much for joining me. And to all you watching, I appreciate it. Whether you watch it and catch us on Thursday or anytime during the week, I appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Peace.
Well, don't you go yet.